Okay, Carlos, we're recording. Great to see you.
You too. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course, man, of course. And I've had Rafa on the podcast before with oh my God, now my memory is with Lyudmila and another guy, and we were talking about the elections and everything, and obviously Lyudmila's work with the human rights aspect of things. And yeah, so it's nice to connect with you and follow up on this story of what happened with the elections in Guatemala. But of course, first of all, Lauren is going to ask you the first question.
Why do people rig elections?
Well, I suppose the same reason that they print money. It's easier to live in a world without rules for those that are rulers. But for those of us that prefer to live in a world with rules without rulers, different um, world becomes possible. And so I think it's a matter of people will rig elections as long as they can, just like people will print money as long as they can.
Yeah, your follow-up question, I think, is perfect then. Okay, go for it.
Does Bitcoin fix elections?
I've been hearing Bitcoin fixes this for a long time, and my personal opinion is that Bitcoin doesn't fix anything. Bitcoiners who study Bitcoin and learn how to use the magic that is inherent to this internet money realize how to use that to fix problems. And so there are some of us who believe that, in particular, the time chain aspects of Bitcoin allows us to not necessarily fix elections, but at the very least eliminate 99% of the attack surface, making it much, much, much harder.
So there's a little play on words here, right? Because the word fix means if you were to fix an election, that means you've manipulated the result. And fiat money incentivizes people to fix elections, whereas Bitcoin will fix an election and make it fair, make it immutable.
You
Turns it,
can use Bitcoin to hack an election in order to make it honest.
yeah. Imagine we that's that's clown world getting inverted, right? That's Bitcoin doing the Bitcoin thing, inverting clown world and actually fixing in the correct term to fix something to make it better, to mend it, and that's what Bitcoin did with the work that they were doing at Simple Proof in Guatemala, which we're going to learn a lot about. But yeah, any further questions or thoughts? And I'm wearing the time chain on my t-shirt. Shout out Memphis Space.
Um, can we just go to Guatemala?
Yeah, sure.
There,
All right.
please do.
Tomorrow?
Can I ask
Yeah,
you a question?
let's go. Um,
Can I ask you a question?
oh yeah.
Do you plan if you could vote right now, as I assume you're not 18 or whatever legal age is required wherever you reside, but if you could vote, would you?
Probably not. I don't know. I'm still like really young, so I don't understand a lot yet about the voting thing. But I don't think so.
Hmm?
It really does
And
depend.
a follow-up question. If you could play a game where you could make a voting system more honest on election night, is that a game that you might consider playing?
Yeah, probably, maybe, most likely.
Cool. Well, I'm gonna show you a game that was played by a lot of young kids, I think in general, girls in Guatemala, in order to help us make the elections a bit more honest in Guatemala. And please
Okay.
come whenever you do. Plenty places to go and visit. For starters, Bitcoin Lake in Atitlan, but it's a magical place. It's right next door to El Salvador, which you may know where that is now. And sandwiched in between Mexico and El Salvador.
So Bitcoin Lake, I've heard great things about that you can pretty much live on Bitcoin there now, and it's an incredible, beautiful, wonderful place.
Somewhat objective point of view here, and I believe that the Lake Atitlan is the most beautiful lake in the world, and
Wow.
so don't trust, verify though. So you're gonna have to go and see it for yourself.
Dang it, I guess we have to go.
Yeah. Oh well. Yes.
Well, we have a lot of places to go now.
And I'm sure the food is incredible.
Well, November, December, and January are the most beautiful months by far. That usually coincides with the most terrible weather up in the northern hemisphere. We are a part of the northern hemisphere, but on the equator at 14 degrees north of the equator, and so it also coincides with adopting Bitcoin, a major conference in El Salvador in November. So my suggestion is you got to go to El Salvador. Adopting Bitcoin is probably the best time to do it. And then while you're at it, it's just, a 4-hour drive to come over to Guatemala. And like I said, November is the most beautiful month out of the year. Plenty of wind that's blowing the water away so that it's no longer raining. But because it's been raining at that point for about 6 months, it's the most lush and green that you will find it. So come on down.
That's
nice,
perfect.
nice shill. So anybody listening, whoever's going to El Salvador, take the 4-hour round road trip and go and visit the lake and go and spend some Bitcoin and support the community.
Indeed. It's opportunity to contrast a top-down Bitcoin adoption in the case of El Salvador versus a bottom-up. So get both.
Yes, very interesting contrast, actually.
You know what we could do, Daddy?
Yeah.
In November.
Yeah.
To like December, we could be in South America, right? And then we could go to Asia from December to February.
Okay. Go make the plans. Go buy the tickets. All right. Say goodbye to Carlos.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Pleasure. Take care.
Okay, mate. Well, before we get into the what happened with the election and everything like that, let's just try and get a little bit of feel of who you are and how you found Bitcoin, because the people listening, they always love rags to riches, pleb, Bitcoin rabbit hole story. So yeah, fire away wherever you want to start us in your journey. What made you look in and start really embracing this technology.
Sure. So I was born and raised in Guatemala in the 80s and throughout the 90s. And then I got a chance to go and study in the States. And there's in economics from North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And, didn't learn about the Austrians, all Keynesian. And so afterwards, I graduated in 2009, which was the worst time to graduate because it's in the thralls of the great financial crisis. So I had initially hoped to work in the States, but it was just, the wrong time to try and do something in the States. So I decided to move back home. And it was kind of a great timing anyway, because I was able to join my dad and starting a new business line that he was considering. And so joined the family business, and we were doing that for a few years. And then all of a sudden, this is, family business that my dad had been running for about 30 years, roofing and, metal works. So gnarly engineering, building, big stuff. And we were, doing our thing, had built over 1 million square meters of roofs in Central America. And actually prompted me to start one of my first businesses, which was my own business with a business partner on solar energy, because since we had a bunch of roofs and access to them and people that could get up on them and work on them, it seemed sensible to train that same group of people to then install energy. And so we were, I was doing that entrepreneurial experience in Central America when one day we found out reading the newspaper that 2 out of 3 of the businesses in our family enterprise had been added overnight to the Office of Foreign Asset Control, specially designated narcotics kingpin and terrorist watch list, which is run by the United States Treasury Department. This is considered the death knell to anyone in the financial world. It's basically the darkest of black lists that the United States Treasury has, and is the culmination of the weaponization of the United States dollar. And we were thrown into this amongst another maybe like 40 people and other businesses, and had no warning, no due process, no recourse, and spent the next 24 months getting off that list. Finally, after 24 months, we were issued a letter saying, you have been removed from the list, and the United States Treasury reminds you that it can add you to the list at any point in time. So there was no, we're sorry for making a mistake or anything, because that's what it was. It was a mistake. But it took us 24 months to get off of it. But at that point, the damage had been done. We had been given this scarlet letter of narcotics kingpin, or maybe terrorist. You never know. And it's hilarious because the banks. My dad had gone out of business twice as an entrepreneur. This was, we were close to going out of business the third time. This actually finally put that business out, completely out of business. And it was unfortunate that it wasn't all of the businesses in the enterprise. It was only 2 out of 3. Because had all of our businesses been added to the list, we could have argued force majeure to the banks and basically told them to eat of all our debts. But because we still had another business that we could still use, it just meant getting further and further into debt for the next 5 or 6 years, and just watching over 30 years of my dad's work being destroyed, all because someone in Washington hit the keystroke. And basically that experience taught me that fiat is not your money, right? And it's the kind of experience that it's very hard to unsee once you go through something like that. And so I vowed to, throughout that process, I actually got involved in the election system in Guatemala. We have a means by which the election system is run by volunteers, citizen volunteers. So as I'm going through the saga where we lost access to our bank account and couldn't issue checks even though we had money, all this process, I was working as a volunteer in the election system. And I also got exposed to Bitcoin throughout that time. And so I started realizing that the work that I was doing in the election system is very similar to how Bitcoin works. And understanding that voting systems anywhere are essentially consensus algorithms. But in the case of Guatemala, because we use paper ballots and we have this mobilized army of people that protect and custody the votes, it becomes a proof of work consensus algorithm. And so it really helped me understand the benefits of having proof of work consensus versus proof of stake consensus. And realizing that, at least in our case, we have the ability to don't trust verify how our voting system works. And that is fundamentally at the core of how Bitcoin works, in that it's not relying on banks or the government to give you the privilege of using your money, but rather energy and the distributed consensus algorithm that reaches consensus every 10 minutes. And so just was impacted by how this tool could very much and would have helped us in our business. At that point it was too late, but afterwards realizing this is so important, and I'm convinced that Bitcoin is the most powerful technology to avoid the collapse of our civilization and potentially species. So just wanting to do everything I can within my little region to accelerate the adoption of Bitcoin. And eventually, because of the election experience that I had as a volunteer, realized that I could use the voting process as a means of educating a different kind of person that hasn't gotten exposed to Bitcoin truthfully, has kind of had a layer of FUD put around them. But I figured if we use democracy to reach that person with a different kind of message, a message around truth and of the ability of the time chain in particular, that I could do something tangible to help my region adopt Bitcoin in an organic and faster way.
So what year? So that was 2019. You joined as a civilian voting auditor or some sort. Yeah.
I was a volunteer in 2011 and 2015.
Okay, shit. Right. Okay. So you've seen
it was an ongoing process. Every 4 years we vote. And so I was a volunteer in 2011, 2015. And then in 2019, I actually came back as an auditor because my father and a cousin ran for Congress. And they asked me for money, but I said, I'd rather check the system, audit it, don't trust, verify, and be your auditor. And so in 2019, I graduated from being what I call a coin join coordinator of the voting system, where I manage the votes and process them and issue results, to being an auditor on behalf of a political party, getting access to how the system worked in the background. And that's when in 2019, the system collapsed very publicly. People went to jail. And so I built open source tools to actually try to figure out what happened. And Bitcoin was at the core of what we were doing. And I essentially failed in 2019 because I reacted to a serious problem. And so in 2023, what I was able to do was lower my time preference and build the tools so that in 2023 we were ready. And at that point, we actually created a startup called simpleproof.com, which is where I work now. And it's the startup that built the Immutable Backup service, which was contracted by the election authorities of Guatemala. And it's the first nation state use case of Bitcoin in a national election to protect its voting results. And doing so in a way that doesn't cause blockchain bloat, right? So we are not spamming the chain with JPEGs. Yeah.
Okay, so lots to go on here. I'm going to come back. Come back to JPEGs. 2011, 2015. You're young and probably bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And did you believe in politics? Is that why you wanted to be as close to it as possible? Or were you skeptical and you wanted to look under the hood? Where was you? How old were you in 2011?
I was 25.
And you'd not found Bitcoin yet?
No, I may have heard something, but
right. So you're 25 at this point, and you've come back from the US.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, why I joined it is I was working with my dad, and an uncle was also in the company. And my family has a tradition of, caring about stuff. And that starts with complaining about stuff. But fortunately, the older generation, my uncle told me, kids, stop complaining about the politics and why everything sucks, and, actually do something. And so my uncle had been a part of this civilian army that makes up the voting system since the early 90s, which is kind of when it took off. And it's this, it's literally referred to locally as the civilian army. And so he told me, if you want to do something useful with your time, instead of just complaining and bitching and moaning, you could actually show up on election day and be a custodian of about 500 votes. So come and help me make sure that, they don't steal elections, instead of just complaining about it. And so he dragged me in there, and I went through this process that's really magical in Guatemala. It's an organic, volunteer-based process where, two of my friends, or a few friends, and I were responsible for 500 votes. And so that's how it's a proof of work consensus algorithm, where these coin join coordinators are the ones that keep the system honest, by getting involved directly in their neighborhood vote, and doing so in front of witnesses, so that everything is hand counted in paper and everything's published, so anyone can audit it, right? So does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Right. So yeah, I've got is the term 4 years, like the president, or is president or prime minister?
Yeah, so it's a president, and Guatemala has every 4 years we just replace the entire government. So we vote on the president, on the legislative branch, on municipal governments, and also a Central American parliament. That's
So it's not like the US where you could get revoted in for, like, obviously they have maximum 8 years. No, that's only in the US you can do that.
Yeah, we are limited to one-term presidencies by some law or whatever.
That's the key point. By some law or whatever. Who set that law? Because I've heard this before. It's all across Central and South America, that 4 years is the max.
Well, we initially had 5, and then we switched it to 4, and we also had midterms, but then we switched down to 4. El Salvador has 5, so it varies. Now, in our case, we don't have any midterms, so it's every 4 years we get, we replace the entire apparatus, right? And through this process that mobilizes somewhere to the tune of 300 to 400,000 people at the voting tables. And so that represents upwards of 5 to 7% of the total, votes cast. So on average, one of every 21 voters is present at the voting tables, helping count the votes and create the consensus. So
I wish I could remember where I heard it. Maybe it was like on a John Perkins. The
yeah,
Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
yeah. So in our current constitution dates back to 1985. Our revolution was in 80, 81, and it's kind of a similar timetable around Central America, where the Washington or the Chicago consensus was in vogue after Pinochet in Chile, and so for whatever reason they had this idea of a formula of only have these brief periods, I guess, as a means of avoiding going back to the early 1900s tradition of Latin American dictators just kind of taking over for decades at a time. The most powerful dictator of the 20th century in Guatemala ruled from like 1905 through 1915, and then we had another one from 1920-ish through 1945. And so yes, it's the idea, and it's not just the U.S. economic hitman idea, right? I always push back on folks saying, oh, it's the CIA sponsored coup in Guatemala. It's like, yeah, they did that, but they had a lot of local help, a lot of local people that participated, and their opinion was we need to avoid empowering a dictator that could get in power and be there for decades, because it was very hard to get rid of them. The story of the 20th century in Latin America is a story of a lot of revolution, to a lot of pain and bloodshed, of getting rid of these people that had become kind of encrusted in power. Maybe the pendulum swung a little too far, because 4 or 5 years is just not enough time to do anything.
Well, it's classic high time preference, isn't it? As we know, as Bitcoiners now, that the incentive structure for anybody in office is just to kickstart the economy and make it look as though they've rescued the economy and they've only got 4 years there, and as long as they leave the place in a good place, and that generally means taking lots of, in the case of Latin American countries, Central American companies, taking loans from the IMF to make it look as though economic prosperity is happening and new infrastructure comes in, and that's it. But behind
I wish new infrastructure.
Huh?
I wish new infrastructure were coming
right,
in. They stopped building that stuff in the 70s. I mean, in the 70s, when they got these loans, at least they built the stuff. Nowadays, we don't even get the stuff, right? We just get the loan. So it's yeah, I mean, it used to be an okay deal, right? You get some infrastructure, and a small cadre of people become unimaginably wealthy, but now it's become unimaginably wealthy without any infrastructure. And so definitely the pushback is much stronger nowadays, because you literally don't get anything out of it. And the result for Guatemala over the past 50, 60 years is slowly over time, we had been a primarily agrarian society. However, we do have a fair amount of industry. In Central America, we are the beachhead, where we're the big dogs. We've, historically, back in even colonial times, Guatemala was where the Spanish government ruled, and so Guatemala has always been a larger economy, a more prosperous location. And so in the 20th century, we had a fair amount of industry, which still is there, but it just lagged. And now what the boom over the past 50 years has been just exporting migrant workers, usually through, illegal means, so that once they show up to the United States, they have absolutely no rights. And we have grown completely dependent on their remittances inflow to maintain a somewhat stable macroeconomic situation, where we just consistently consistently keep pushing out the poorest of the poor and sending them to become migrant workers without rights. And the insane thing is that that's the American dream. Like I literally have people that have quit their job working with me, and I try to pay people more than average rate, but they're like, you can't compete. Like I have a brother in Seattle who is earning like 10 times what I earn. And so I could just move to the US, work there for 5, 10 years, and then have enough capital to move back and actually start something locally. And so you literally now have the problem where the funnel, I mean, it used to be a trickle, then it's a river. Now it's a waterfall where all of our best workers are leaving. So now industry is having the problem of finding qualified workers because qualified workers are getting paid 10 times as much in the United States. And the economy is completely dependent on the money that's being sent, which has become this kind of release valve of, if we didn't have this option of the poorest of the poor leaving, then they would stick around, and all of a sudden you'd have a bunch of unemployed male capable workers in their prime of age. And what they do when they don't have good prospects is they revolt, right? So it's a very unfortunate series of events that for sure has contributed to the status quo.
So what year did you actually like pick up your first Bitcoin book, or listen to that first podcast, or see that first article, or finally call your friend that's been bugging you for ages and come crawling back saying, yeah, please tell me something about when did you really start looking into it?
So it's complicated because it was very much a shitcoiny route, right? Or in our case, it was the blockchain. Guatemala was hit very much by the blockchain is what's really important.
Yeah, classic.
Bitcoin is the next Yahoo, right? It's like you got to make sure to be on the Google, right? And the blockchain is the underlying technology that matters. And so, Guatemala is a unique case, and a specific part of Guatemala is a unique case because we have this university called Universidad Francisco Marroquín, which is an Austrian economics university that was founded by a student of Hayek. And so, so he studied under Hayek in the 50s and then came back to Guatemala and started this university in the 60s and the 70s. And so Guatemala had a small cadre of society, which I'm a part of, and a certain elite that is involved in economics and business that came out of this Austrian school and was a part of that first wave of libertarians getting exposed to Bitcoin. I have friends who, for extra credit in their finance courses in 2010, they won 5 Bitcoin, right? Like this is how early some people in Guatemala got exposed to this. But then very shortly thereafter, the blockchain, not Bitcoin bug hit very badly. And so I actually used to organize blockchain meetups in Guatemala. And that's where I met a bunch of my partners in these activities where initially it was blockchain is going to change the world, and Guatemala is definitely a perfect laboratory use case of this technology. Let's come up with all these ways of applying the technology. And then after several years of that, realizing, well, we've been talking about blockchain fixing all these problems, and when is it actually going to fix anything? And just realizing the only thing that has actually fixed anything is Bitcoin. And so for me, it was COVID really bringing me back to take a deeper dive and a second look at everything, and just realize the only thing, yes, sure, blockchain is going to change the world, except that the only blockchain that matters is Bitcoin, and everything else is noise.
Okay, now, yeah, so Bitcoin, not blockchain. If people want to if you're kind of lost in what we're talking about here, what happened around that time? You're probably talking around 16, 17 type of period. Yeah, I remember it well. Everything was going on the blockchain, like bananas on the blockchain. All these articles were coming out in The Economist magazine. I remember reading one vividly about how you can track salmonella. For example, there's a salmonella breakout. Another site hop in itself. But you can track the eggs back to the farm, or you can track the pork back to the provider, because it was all logged on the blockchain at every point of every touch point of the supply chain. And yeah, people were going crazy for that kind of chat. Dental records on the what was that? What was that? What was that coin? Dentacoin or something. Yeah, no, and with all of these new blockchains come their new tokens, which yeah, it's crazy. But I
Well,
do
you
have an
speak of it
episode.
as if it's the past, but Jamie Dimon, heading JP Morgan, is still telling you that the blockchain is the under, as he's selling, ETFs up the
Mhm.
wazoo. He's literally still telling you that blockchain is the what matters, and so
Yeah.
there's still a very large portion of society that's not a bit non-Bitcoiners are still very much in this world, right? And so
Mhm.
for us, it actually we realized in Guatemala, it's like, yeah, sure, we're going to use the blockchain to protect the election records. And usually at this point, people don't even ask which blockchain because they just think that the blockchain is the blockchain. And so when they finally ask, which blockchain, it's like Bitcoin. And it's like, oh, some people actually, we're actually stuck in between a rock and a hard place because just earlier today, I sent you that video.
Mhm.
I don't know if you're familiar with Newt. Obviously, right off the bat, he's like, "Please don't spam the chain with your useless democracy." It's like we're not spamming the chain. So it's like within Bitcoin, we're accused of being spammers and putting JPEGs on Bitcoin, and so. But then within the blockchain space, people are like, "Why are you using Bitcoin? Why didn't you use this cheaper blockchain?" It's like, well,
Why don't you
actually,
use my block? Yeah, I'll be able to do it for you better, cheaper, faster. And
we're doing it better, cheaper, faster, except we're not sacrificing security. And so
yeah,
it's like, well, if it's cheaper and more secure, then it's a no-brainer.
right. So for those people that want to get up to speed on that, Parker Lewis is well known for writing his essay "Bitcoin Not Blockchain," and that's in his book "Gradually Then Suddenly." And I've been doing a series with him. So that's episode 431. Go back and check that out. Bitcoin Not Blockchain. Please get up to speed with your batting these people back, right? Because we still face them, and it's really important to understand and get your language right. So yeah, go back episode 431. All right, so 2019. Then what went down in that election?
Oof. Ah, Impossible to say, but because they everything disappeared. Basically, I was connected to a database that publishes the results. And I could actually share on my screen if that's useful.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, people
Right.
can watch this on YouTube as well, but I'm sure it'll work in audio wherever people are listening or
Where do I
watching.
share screen? How do I share my
At the
screen?
bottom right in the middle says
Oh yeah,
share screen.
I see
Yeah.
it. Yeah, the very obvious button. Cool. Uh, so is it coming up?
Yep.
Cool. So this is just our website, simpleproof.com. You can get more information here. But this is now our first client. And this is the 2023, but it'll help me explain what happened in 2019. And
Mhm.
so this is trep.gt. Anyone can do this. Don't trust, verify. When you show up here, you can select between these two buttons. It's the June general election or the August runoff. I'm going to go to the June general. What we have in Guatemala is this election night reporting system that we call trep.gt, whereas you can see it's selected on Presidente. So I'm looking at the presidential race. I could click on Lista Nacional if I wanted to go into the legislative election, but I'm just going to stick to the presidential. And then I could scroll to the right and I see, oh, the system is claiming that all of these documents are available. So they have 99.12% of all the documents. And their last update to this database was June 29th, 2023. That's a bold claim, right? 99% of the documents and from June 29th, 2023. How do you verify that, right? Like it's not as easy as it would seem, but at the very least when I show this to some people they're like, "Wow, at least you have an election authority that's telling you that that this is public." Like most democracies don't even offer you the privilege of checking the data, right? There's even a button up here that says database that I could click and download all of the back end and check it on a CSV file. But let's not go there yet. I scroll down, I see, oh, here's the map of Guatemala for those who've never seen it. Mexico up in the northwest, El Salvador down in the southeast. And if I keep going down, so I can see the national totals. And so this website is what I was connected to in 2019 to try to check, whether these totals made sense or not. The way we do this is if I go back and there's this box over here that says Mesa. Mesa is table. We have 24,500 of these. What's your favorite number between 1 and 24,500, Daniel?
21.
21. Fan favorite. So now instead of looking at national totals, I'm looking at table number 21, that's center number 3, municipality of Guatemala, et cetera, et cetera. And so instead of the national, I'm looking at the individual, right? So as an auditor, what I needed to do was to check, all right, they're saying that there was 9 votes for this UNE party and 3 for Azul or blue, and all of these other clowns that, this is my clown world. So many clowns. The opposite of not enough choices. And so again, don't trust verify. How do I know this isn't bogus? We have this button here that says ver. And so now I'm bringing up the actual JPEG that was produced apparently by table number 21, which was signed by Julio, Fernando, Javier, and Maria, claiming that 272 people showed up to vote. And you can see 9 votes were assigned to UNE, 3 to blue. So I could just visually open this up and see 9 to UNE. So I go back and I check, right? 9, that's correct, right? And so now all I have to do as an auditor is do that about 3 million times, right? That's the total amount of the database. But the tricky thing in 2019 is these JPEGs were changing. You would log in one day and they were there. You would log in another day and they weren't there. And then another day they were there, and another day they weren't there. And we produce in 2023 125,000 of these. So it was just like standing under Niagara Falls with a water cup, right? Trying to fit, it's like you're never gonna get it, right? And so I was just overwhelmed in 2019. Obviously, you can imagine newscasters on the media saying, well, blue party is winning. Oh, the feed is gone. Green party is winning. Oh, the feed is gone. Yellow party. Oh, now purple. Like it was pandemonium, mayhem, and people went to jail, right? And so it's impossible to know what happened except a bunch of shenanigans, and I don't trust any of it. And so in 2023, what the authorities were pressured, right? Because they literally had their employees go to jail 4 years prior. And so it's like, what are you going to do differently this time? So that's when they were convinced to add this somewhat obviously orange button. It's like, I wonder why so orange. And so when you click that verify hash button, now you're no longer on the election reporting system, you're on the immutable backup service that was built by Simple Proof. And so all that this does is it says, Simple Proof received this document on June 25th, 2023 at 10:10 p.m. And then here's the SHA-256 hash, which if you don't know what a SHA-256 is, consider it a unique code in the universe for this JPEG. Like there's nothing in this universe that has this string of characters other than this JPEG. And so if you have this SHA-256 for the JPEG, then you could use Bitcoin to prove that this information exists. And in this case, we have confirmation on the blockchain of Bitcoin at 10:18 p.m. on June 25th, 2023. So a total of 8 minutes went by between when it appeared on Simple Proof's database to when you could confirm this on the Bitcoin blockchain. Again, very orange. Why so orange? And so further down, you have the source file, which is the JPEG that you can download and check the SHA-256, or you could bring it up and you could view it and literally like you see 21 Julio Fernando, and so you could go back and forth visually, but a much more simple way would be to just download and check the SHA-256, right? And so, but the main advantage is the OTS file. This stands for Open Timestamps. And so now I'm going to show you the Open Timestamps website, which I pushed back, for example, I mentioned Newt earlier. And for anyone that doesn't know what Open Timestamps is, please check it out. It's open source. It's been available since 2016. Like I said, opentimestamps.org. All of the code is here. Bitcoiners have been using this for ages, including the money maximalists that want to keep the blockchain without bloat. So I have yet to meet a Bitcoiner that's against open timestamps. I'm wondering if you know about this, Daniel. Like, do you have any opinions on open timestamps, or
I learned about it through watching that video, the film, the documentary with Peter Todd, and yeah. So
Peter Peter is the lead developer of Open Timestamps.
Right.
So a group of developers put this together in 2016. You can check all the code, and Bitcoiners have consensus on 21 million and Open Timestamps. Like, it's amazing. Like, I don't understand how we are not more aware that there's no reason not to use Open Timestamps. Like, there's literally not. And I've yet to meet anyone that's against it. So please, if you are, tell me why. But so what is it? What does Open Timestamps actually do? So we have here this file that accompanies these JPEG. I can click on view here and show you all the gnarly cryptography that proves that this hash is, connected to a Bitcoin block. We realized, people can't really follow this. This is like worse than Chinese or Hindi. And so it's like, we need to build tools to make it easy for people to understand cryptography. And so what you're looking at your screen now is what we call the Open Timestamps Navigator, which basically is a long string, for those that aren't seeing this, that takes you to a SHA-256, which starts with 7834 EC. So in this specific case, this is the SHA of the JPEG that I was showing you earlier. And again, this is a unique identifier. So there's the only way that this SHA could exist is if it's derived from this JPEG. And so what we're showing you now is this SHA is connected through a series of mathematical proofs. If you follow our orange brick road here, and it's basically like, just you take one SHA, you join it with another one to create a new SHA. So that's how you build what's called a Merkle tree. So it's a series of mathematical proofs that tie this unique mathematical identifier to the very top of this tree, which is referred to as the Merkle root. And this Merkle root also has a SHA-256, which starts with CDA63A. Now, the difference between this SHA and the previous one is this one also includes a transaction ID. And so we provide a link to mempool.space. So again, shout out to the Wiz and crew. And so I'm sure you've seen this before, but we want to look at the details section of the transaction. So you can see it's block number 795961, which is the same as here, 795961. But within the transaction, if you have the timestamp 2023-06-25 at 10:18, which again is the same timestamp as we're showing here. But cool, so Bitcoin can be used as a time chain. Yes, Satoshi famously refers to it as a time chain and never a blockchain. Specifically, what we use is in the details section, in the inputs and outputs, there is this thing called the op return function. You can think of op return as kind of the memo space of a check within a transaction. And in that memo space, in the op return space, we included that Merkle root hash. And so this is another unique identifier that only exists in the universe as a process of the mathematical proofs we showed you before, meaning that this transaction actually becomes an anchor for all of the information that we decide to put on this tree, which could be infinity minus one. So we could have an infinite number of JPEGs all tied to one single transaction with this one timestamp, meaning that I can prove that this JPEG that I'm showing you on the Guatemalan National Elections website does originate from election night on June 25th, 2023. Why this is powerful is, as I mentioned in 2019, the problem was they were changing. And so over a period of 6 days, these JPEGs were changing. And so if you give me election data 6 days after the election, I call bullshit. But if you give me election data from the night of the election, then maybe I'll still call bullshit, but I have less reasons to do so because you've effectively eliminated 99% of the attack surface of an election and forced any attackers to only attack you on election night, on the beginning, right? And so when you force people to only have to, their only option to attack you is on that moment, that's when people make mistakes. And so, yes, in our case, the mistake that was revealed was that the people behind these JPEGs actually misconfigured the machines, making the timestamp that's inherent to the JPEG give the erroneous time zone. And so in this rather miraculous Latin American irony, it's the timestamps that were made public actually gave the impression of election fraud. And that's what the weaponized justice system is arguing in court right now in Guatemala, that there was election fraud because the timestamps on the JPEGs are prior to election night. But when you see the timestamps of what's on Bitcoin, that's when you actually prove that the election was truthful. And so let me throw that on the screen real quick. But do you have any questions so far, Daniel?
So 2023, you implemented this. That election can hands down not be at all questioned. Well, it can be questioned, but it can be verified. That's the difference to what happened in 2019, where we still have no idea what actually went down.
I have no idea what happened in 2019. In 2023, the legal argument by the Election Crimes Unit of the Guatemalan, is what you're seeing on your screen in gray. They're saying we found timestamps that originate prior to polls closing, meaning that the JPEGs on the internet were created prior to polls closing, which means that they are the product of fraud. However, when you see that the rest of the gray, I'm showing it, and on the y-axis is the number of files, and on the x-axis is the 48-hour period around election night. All of a sudden, you get a giant push, a giant amount of the documents are from around 35 hours after election night. But then when you look at the timestamps on Bitcoin, you have one single bell curve that's a normal distribution. And so I can't really say about the 3%. So what you were saying, I can hands down say, I can't hands down speak to this 3%, but I can mathematically prove that the 53% that is here is either the product of time travelers who decided to use their newly found powers to, commit election fraud in Guatemala instead of buying Bitcoin back in January of 2009, because that's what I would do if I had a time machine. Instead of doing that, they went to Guatemala and tampered the elections. But if the other more plausible explanation is there was a misconfiguration of the machines, and so the JPEGs have a metadata timestamp that's the wrong time zone. But if you use Bitcoin, all of a sudden that error disappears. And so had this information not been there, though, it would have been impossible for the election authorities to prove that it was just an honest mistake, because the impression of fraud is, frankly, nowadays more powerful than reality, right? So does that make sense?
Yeah. Right. Okay. So to come back to this pushback on JPEGs on the blockchain, bloating the blockchain, when you went back to that transaction, what was the fee on that particular one that you were showing us? Because obviously you've got to pay to get.
Let me bring it back up. Yeah. So if you keep going down the details, that one transaction that we had occupied 234 bytes and 152 virtual bytes, right, out of the entire block. And within that one transaction, at the very least, we have all of these JPEGs, right? So basically, this is where, and in terms of the transaction fee, we paid 4,091 sats, which was $1.2 at the time. And we actually overpaid by twice as much because we have an incentive to make sure that our transaction gets on the block. So we try to bid ourselves up. But the beautiful thing about open timestamps and why no one is against it is you literally could have just one transaction per block that timestamps the entirety of all digital files that have been created in all human history. And so, sure, I'm a fan of not spamming the blockchain, but carving out one single transaction that can be used to timestamp absolutely everything seems like a reasonable, exchange, right? Of 234 bytes anchors all data that has been created in the previous 10 minutes by the entire human race on the internet.
Let's just fast forward to the next election, and I just want to throw out a question for you here. When would that be? 2027, I suppose.
In Guatemala, 2027.
Okay, yes. So in 2027, fees are, let's say, are higher. But also there is a bunch of people out there that know your election is coming up, and they know that what you're doing with open timestamps is coming up, and they know that they can spam the blockchain because they've been doing it very, very effectively. And at that night, they can spam the hell out of it and just boot the price up to like they did at the halving. I can't remember where it topped out, 400, 500, 600, who knows. Would that become a problem for your election night? Is that a possible attack surface?
For sure, if that were the only thing that we were doing. But that's where Simple Proof actually, we exist to uphold information integrity. So what we want to build is a world where all public records produced by all governments all over the world are all timestamped. I believe this period of time between 2009 and 2025-ish, let's say, will be looked back in the future, kind of how we look back at automobiles that have levers instead of steering wheels. Of like, you look at that and you're like, how could people have been so stupid to drive a car with levers? Like, obviously the steering wheel. It's like, that's easy for you to say if you'd never seen a steering wheel before and you'd only been, on a horse, right? Pulling on the horse's reins. And so I think in the future, people will look at data on the cloud without a timestamp to Bitcoin as the equivalent of driving a car without a steering wheel, or driving on the highway without a seatbelt. It's like, you can do it, but first of all, you look stupid, right? And second of all, you could die, right? Like it's why take the risk when you can use Bitcoin as the only clock in all of human existence that no one controls. So it can't be wrong. So if there's an argument about whether or not a certain piece of data is legitimate or not, the first thing we can ask is, does it originate from more or less the moment in time when it makes sense that it originates? And so if we are to be attacked on 2027, hopefully by that point, Simple Proof at this point is powering all government records all over the world so that, we have trillions of files that we're adding to the blocks every 10 minutes. And all we need to do is pay that one transaction fee. Now, if for whatever, and so the assumption would be that if you boil down all of the cost of a transaction to, trillion files, it shouldn't be prohibitive. But let's pretend like it were. Then all you need to do is wait for the next block and the next block. So you could set certain thresholds. And so all that you're losing is your ability to pinpoint to a specific 10-minute window within the blocks, right? In the elections, it's super useful to have kind of these 10-minute checkpoints because it provides greater clarity on the health of the data that's being, presented, right? It's very helpful to pinpoint on a 10-minute interval. And actually, we're already exploring using side chains, for example, Liquid or other things that have a more predictable block spaces as opposed to Bitcoin, so that we add an additional layer of timestamps. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, what you have to rely on is Bitcoin if you're going to rely on time. Because if time is an important variable to whatever truth you're trying to create, then there's no better block than Bitcoin on Earth.
So what's been since the election? What's happened? What's changed? What was the result? Like, who's in charge?
Well, the regime weaponized the justice system. They tried to repeat the elections. We almost went to civil war. I shit you not. And fortunately, for whatever reason, the powers that be sided with the election results, and they were forced to be respected. And so the surprise government, because it was a huge surprise, like the first time that this is used during our election since 1985, because that's when we started doing elections this way. For the first time that Bitcoin is used to keep an election honest, turns out we have a very surprising result. So coincidence? Regardless, he was allowed to become the president, and his people are now in power. And so now many people in the upper echelons of power understand that while Bitcoin wasn't the only reason that the election results were respected, it played a role. And so it's a lot easier for me to orange pill people in, the halls of power in Guatemala because they can't just hand wave this away, right? Like this was one of the cornerstones of the security apparatus that protected the election results and is actually the fundamental legal argument to prove that the election fraud claims are not legitimate. So that's creating a lot more interest from other public records. And so hopefully the current surprise government decides that their legacy will be that all public records in Guatemala will now be timestamped to Bitcoin, meaning that no one can ever fake public records once they have been made public. And so we do have a series of ongoing conversations and hope to have news soon about other records that will now be added to Bitcoin. But then we also were approached by a private client that provides services to the government and basically reached out saying, look, I provide information management services. I have sensitive data that the government requires me to handle, and I need insurance to prove that I've never tampered with the documents. Because there's a lot of private people, companies that provide government services who are, entrusted with data, and they have to demonstrate that they are not tampering data. Well, Bitcoin turns out to be the best way to prove that. Will be, with cryptography instead of, trust me, bro. And so we already have our second client. And so now, simple proof, we have soon we'll publish basically a pre-seed investment round that we are raising to very aggressively go after this market and live in a world where public records can no longer change, and all that we have to sacrifice is, maybe 1,000 bytes on a block.
Right. Well, one thing I'm not clear on, the 4 years, does that end for the individual? Can the party stay? Can the party stay in power, or the party have to relinquish?
So it was a different party that was elected. The executive branch, and this is the Guatemalan election, I'm assuming is what you're asking about, is the government from 2019 to 2023 was a different party than the government that's been elected now. So all of the executive roles can be removed by the newly elected president. And so he's in the process of removing people, although it takes a while. And then in the legislative branch, people were switched out, and it's a different legislative body. So for all intents and purposes, the main power of Guatemala has switched, and it switched in such a way that hadn't happened in about 80 years.
Right.
So
imagine they'd be bullish on Bitcoin. My goodness. Because they wouldn't be there without it.
Well, they are very progressive, and for whatever reason, progressives are kind of late right now, but hopefully this is making it easier for them to understand the benefits of it. And then, to be honest, right now, El Salvador and Guatemala are kind of being pit against each other. And so the fact that El Salvador has like claimed Bitcoin kind of pushes these people away just from a Bukele derangement syndrome type of position.
Right.
But there's a bunch of us making that argument, and so it's just like, well, you don't need to. My personal position as a Guatemalan is that Bitcoin is a matter of national security. When our two most important business partners for Guatemala are number one the U.S. and number two El Salvador. Last I checked, the United States has over 100,000 Bitcoin in its control, and El Salvador has almost 6,000. So when your two greatest commercial allies have Bitcoin on their balance sheet, provably so, like having zero is the only wrong answer, right? And traditionally, Guatemala has always been 3 times the size of El Salvador. So my argument is that in order to for Guatemala to maintain historical balance in Central America, we must purchase 3 times as much Bitcoin as what El Salvador has and purchases on a daily basis. Not anything under that risks altering the balance of political and economic power that has existed for about 500 years. So they could choose not to do that and only protect the government records. I, as a citizen, would prefer that they consider the alternative.
When you look at what's going on in the US now with the lead up to this next election and everything that's going on, how close are you to breaking into other countries and
Yep.
getting truthful elections in other countries? And what is your view on the? I look at America as just a freaking pantomime. I can't believe. And sorry, American listeners, I love you, my American cousins, my brothers and sisters, but you've got to understand what it looks like from outsiders looking in. It's a joke. It's retarded. It's ridiculous. It's unbelievable. And all of the simping that goes on, and there's blue and red war, and it's nuts. And I'm no fan of any political class, but can you make waves in a different country, do you think? Have you had these conversations? What's been going on behind the scenes?
Sure. So the first thing to understand about the United States election system is that it's not a monolith, right? What I just showed you in Guatemala is a single state that controls its entire election. We have 9.2 million registered voters and one national election authority that oversees how the system operates. In the case of the United States, there are 50 states, right? Plus a bunch of, protectorates or whatever, but they don't matter. Everyone knows it. The 50 states matter. They each are autonomous, and so they have their own election law, which you could imagine they establish the protocol rules for how the election and voting system works in that state. And then they empower county clerks to be the executors of that protocol. And so really in the United States, you have a situation where there are over 3,000 different election authorities, like what I just showed you. They all have their own kind of election night reporting system for their, jurisdictions, which last I checked, it's, estimates go from at least 3,000 to upwards of 9,000 election authorities, right? That's why it's kind of a mess. But historically speaking, that's been an advantage because it's a decentralized system. There's no way that you could just corrupt one single authority and rule them all, right? You're forced to work with thousands of them, right? And so our approach is appeal to Bitcoiners to say, if you're listening to this and this resonates with you, I can go into why I think it should resonate with you, but if this resonates with you, it's your local election is run by your local county clerk. And in my experience, they are just normal people, normies trying to do a job, trying to do right by their neighbors. Not all of them, but most of them are just good people. And usually they don't know about cryptography and they don't know about technology. And they're just about to get hit by an avalanche of nonsense from the state of the world in where it is. And they could use a tool like this that, what I describe it as, Bitcoin can be an anchor of truth within a sea of lies. And so as this giant avalanche is coming down and nothing we can do to stop it, November 5th will come, remember the 5th of November. Those counties that choose to use this can just, lay a flag down, lay an anchor down and hold on for dear life, right? And what we offer is all of these places produce election results. The term for the document is called the Statement of Votes Cast or the Ballot Summary Document, and in other cases, the poll tapes. And so these documents exist, they are produced, and at this point, they're all digital. And so once they're produced, you could just use this system, which, by the way, is open source. So technically, you could just do it yourself, but we provide a way to, erase the complexity so that it's like just click a button, it's like one step, just boop, and you do it and poof, it all just magic happens in the background. And you could protect these documents from what is going to happen, right? And so we are talking with several different counties to do pilots and are very optimistic that we'll have at the very least one example. And so, it's just a drop in the bucket, but it's a start, right? And I'm of the opinion that What matters is Bitcoin, right? And so when you orange pill even, one part of the system, one of these 3,000 counties, it's 0 to 1. Once we get to 1, it's much easier then to make the case that, there's literally no reason to not do this. Bitcoin is the best clock. So from a perspective of providing time data to an election, there's no reason not to do this, and elections are time sensitive. So having just the one use case that we can point to and say, see, that those election results are provably from election night. That one county inherently has an advantage over all of the rest of the counties and can provide a beacon of light for the rest of the country to follow. So we just want to start small, and so looking to contact county clerks. And if you're a Bitcoiner that is involved in your local election, please reach out. I've already talked to a few that are like that, and when they realize that we don't have to change anything, it's just run your system as it is, and then right at the end, when you're about to hit publish and put stuff on the internet that AI and anyone can grab and create whatever they want, right when you do that, you just add one more step, connect with us, and all of your data is timestamped to Bitcoin, so that even if sock puppets on the internet create a million fake versions, you can prove with Bitcoin which ones are yours. And and that could provide very useful, like in the case of Guatemala, where the justice system was weaponized against them, and they now are using that evidence to keep themselves from going to jail, right? But you could also imagine a scenario where CrowdStrike all of a sudden pushes out another, update, and all of the screens experience the blue screen of death, and all of you're locked out of your data, and then all of a sudden, boop, it gets back online. How do you know your data is your data, right? Like, if you don't use something like this, I sincerely don't know how you're going to protect under extreme circumstances. And if you're not prepared for extreme circumstances this November, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Don't be surprised when the clown world comes for you.
Oh man, it's gonna be yeah.
So in summary, I'm optimistic, but it does slow and steady, and I believe in Bitcoiners. But most Bitcoiners push back because it's like, oh, democracy is for status cucks, or whatever you want to trope you want to use on me. And just to clarify, is I am not doing this for democracy. I am doing this for Bitcoin, because if Bitcoin protects democracy, then if you're against Bitcoin, you're against democracy. And Bitcoiners might not care about democracy, but most of society, especially in the Western world, care very deeply about it for whatever reason. You might disagree, but they do. And so creating this argument is going to be very powerful for us to protect minors when someone's trying to say, oh, they're just doing useless mathematical functions. Like, well, those useless mathematical functions are protecting your democratic institutions, right? So it's about making people's job harder of why Bitcoin is useless, because Bitcoin is provably useful, except they can ignore the money because reasons, but they can't ignore public records, and they especially, I don't think, can ignore voting. So it's just another touch point for normies that, because it's non-money related, maybe kind of pierces through the fog and breaks away at the FUD, so that it's a tangent, another way of just getting the virus out there.
Another angle, yeah, exactly, because everybody comes to Bitcoin for a different reason. We all know that,
exactly.
And just increasing the amount of reasons just improves our chances of bringing more people in. So you've obviously been way deep down the rabbit hole on this whole, putting JPEGs on the blockchain to use that trope of return. When did it become, or did it become, when all of this spam stuff started happening? What were you sitting there thinking, oh my God, like this is going to make our job way harder? Or did you see it for what it was immediately and you thought it would just go away, or you have deeper concerns? And then who did you think was kind of driving it? What were your original thoughts? Because you would have had a unique perspective on it.
So I'd say I was excited about it initially because it's just like, and you know, gutturally, and not to inspire too much hate from the money maximalist, but it's just I see it as astrology on Bitcoin, right? It's like I I'm not into astrology, right? I'm a Virgo, and in the Guatemalan Mayan Tzolkin calendar, I'm a Kan, and I'm just like I don't let it guide my life. I don't find particular meaning. It provides for curious conversations with a bunch of people that are really into that kind of stuff, and so it's like if we can bring that sort of person in, like first of all, it's like Bitcoin is for everyone, right? So the fact that you think you can keep these people out, like I don't think you can, right? Like I think it's inevitable that Bitcoin will become religion. Like it's the that when you look back at the amount of prophets that have been become saints and that people all over the world pray to. Like I'm in Guatemala, we're primarily Catholic. If I can speak more to that tradition, but it's like the number of people that are venerated for their contributions to society, and that people literally, like, before they go to sleep, say their names to pray for their protection is enormous. And when you look at their deeds, like the specific people that have become saints or even prophets, and their actual deeds according to the historical record, this is easier for more modern saints. Like their deeds aren't that special, right? When you compare it to Satoshi Nakamoto, right? Like Satoshi Nakamoto is like, I think, the second coming of Jesus in my personal opinion. And so it's inevitable that this will happen. Now, I love the fact that people push back on it because rationality is a big part of my life. And, if it's starting to become a problem where monetary transactions can't get on there because people are just insisting that, you want some kind of, you know, delusion. I mean, that's a problem, but that's more up to kind of the human race, right? And I don't think just fighting them will um, make it stop, right? I think it's more useful to do something like this, where we're providing a very specific example where it's like, this is somewhat similar, but it's actually the opposite. And that's where I do take offense with people like not, immediately reacting and saying that to my response is, don't trust verify. It seems like you're just basing an opinion on what you saw and what you think happened instead of actually verifying what occurred, which is we're not spamming the blockchain. We're being very efficient with the use of the blockchain and providing a contrary example of, like, all right, an ordinal and inscription is effectively maximizing the amount of data you can put on the Bitcoin blockchain, right? A single unit of data, and trying and attempting to create ownership over that data. We're actually on the opposite spectrum of it, where we're doing zero ownership and then maximum amount of data for the most minimal amount of block space. And so I think it would be more rational for us to say, hey, Bitcoin can be used as a database, but there are smart ways of using it as a database. And here's an example that proves that maybe what you're doing, you should take a second look at, because what all you're going to do is waste your money on fees. And no one wants to waste money. So it's I do think we've been kind of hoodwinked into falling into a very passionate argument that just goes to our kind of lizard brain, instead of just understanding that this is a new population and we can work together. Like, at the end of the day, if people are on Bitcoin, I tend to celebrate that. And in terms of the confusion that's surrounded it, and the flack, basically many people discounted what we did because of this. But I've lowered my time preference. I think it's all a part of some plan, and I just want to build and solve problems because I think work will speak for itself.
Yeah, and what you're doing is important. Whereas what the wizards are doing, Udi and Eric and Al, is not. It's just nonsense. And the people involved in that and the money thrown at that, it's a clear. I think the main problem that the money maximalists had with that crowd in particular was they were just grifting, and they were getting money from people to make for themselves, to buy more Bitcoin for themselves, and preying on people's naivety, and at the same time that was going on, it's hurting the work that you had done. It's discrediting everything that you had achieved, and it's slowing everything down that you've just described here.
Well, then, but you're saying it's not important. That's a value judgment, right? It's like, how do I? It's important to them, and if it's more important to more people enough that more people pay the mining fees, then it's obviously more important. And so for me, it's well, then the best way to fight this kind of thing is create the use cases and prove that it is more important to do these other things. And so that's where, if you think if you're passionate about this, then help me bring in election authorities from all over the world to do this so that the signal drowns out the noise. And then in terms of scamming people out of money, if that's what they're doing, definitely fight them with everything you've got and shame them and put them in jail and etc. Right? Like I definitely would like to keep that culture outside of Bitcoin and have us fight the scammers and take them to jail or find other ways of, if you don't believe in jail because it's a statist, trope or whatever. Yes, let's fight them. But I think we fight them more productively by proving that there are more useful things to do that more people value, right? And that's the point of just like, I think I want to build solutions that will enable a new generation of Bitcoiner to join the movement, one that comes for democracy but stays for Bitcoin. And it turns out that's a substantial amount of people. So, please reach out and help, because it just takes one county this November to use this technology. And then, that we can credibly say that Bitcoin protects democracy in the United States of America. And you can't take that away, right? Like, and if Bitcoin protects democracy, then if you're against Bitcoin, you're against democracy. And I thought we were all in favor of democracy.
Right, Carlos. Let's end it with the final question. If you had one last orange pill left to give to somebody, who would you give it to and why?
One last orange pill. Oof. My unborn son, because
Nice.
I'm almost about to become a father, and I'm pretty sure my little baby, she's already orange pilled. I read her Shamory books every night. Shout out to the Shamory crew if you don't know them. And so I'm pretty sure she's already orange pilled. So the last one that I'd give right now would be my unborn child.
That's amazing. That's the first time ever, almost 500 shows. It's never been given to the unborn offspring. So nice shout. And
Well, they certainly didn't get a chance to participate in the early acquisition, right? So if Bitcoin is kind of this more just world, then 50 years from now, like that, those generations that didn't have a chance to get access to mining it early, they like I do believe that it's even under the situation where you're born into this world with zero Bitcoin, you'd still want there to be Bitcoin because it's just a better world, right? But we can't take for granted that the next generation will take up Bitcoin, right? It has to be useful for them. It has to solve their problems, not just their own fanaticism about how money should work, right?
Yep, absolutely. And I know a very prominent Bitcoiner that used an op return on the birth of his I remember daughter, I think. So yeah, that's on the blockchain.
Yeah.
That's and he's a money maximalist as well. So
Well, it's yep.
I was gonna no go ahead. It's slipped.
Well, it's op return is all of a sudden controversial, but that's where it's if you're upset at what people are doing with something, then that you care about, then all you need to do is show them what it can be used for, right? And it's like outshine them, right? Don't I think it's more important that we shine on like the crazy diamonds that we are.
Absolutely. And yes, I was going to just back up your shout out to Scott and Mallory and the work they've done at Shamory. If you are listening, if you do not have their books and their games, get over to shamory.com, use the code Bitten, you'll get 10% off. They've got books for the Goodnight Bitcoin is a beautiful one. Like if you've got young kids, you know that series of books, right? And you can just read it every single night. It's great, great illustration. And they've just published Toma's book, right? Which is the Great Adventures of Satoshi Nakamoto, I think. Sorry, I don't have it in front of me right now. It's in the post.
And it's great that we end on that, and because I think the Shamory books are great, and I found it useful for me. But it's understanding that culture is a living thing, right? So it's like if you don't like the way that the culture within Bitcoin seems to be going, then the only way is to create better culture. Like you can't cancel culture. Like it's like if anyone was going to understand this, it should be Bitcoiners, right? Like you're not going to out cancel cancel culture. It's like we have to if Bitcoin really is what we expect it to be, we have to create more powerful cultural stories, and that starts with getting out of your shell and maybe stop listening to as many podcasts, even though I'm on a podcast, and get involved, right? Like figure out why your neighbor doesn't care about Bitcoin, right? It's like, and I found it powerful to become involved in my election system and realized a lot of my neighbors care about this. It's a fast way for me to orange pill potentially 300,000 people in Guatemala that are a part of the citizen army, right? And there's a lot of volunteers in the United States, and I think in elections everywhere. And these people, they in their heart, they know that they're a part of this important thing that is like involves consensus. So they're primed for Bitcoin. And so that's what I found. Like there's a culture here that has strong links to Bitcoin, but there are many others, right? And so it's more a matter of just like realizing that the internet is not where you live out your life. I think you have to be in the meat space and try to use the tools. Going back to Lauren's question, right? It's like Bitcoin doesn't fix anything. It's Bitcoiners that have been down the rabbit hole long enough that are sick of the world going to hell, deciding, I'm going to fight the slow creep in whatever way I can. And you'd be surprised. Like I didn't expect this to happen. And I hope
shit moves quickly. Shit moves quickly if you put your foot forward. And I just did actually what's going to probably be the episode just before this release with Avi Burra, who wrote the book 24, and we get deep into the idea of culture and growing.
Oh yeah, I love that guy.
Like this is crazy that art, music, video, filmography, cinematography. Now you with your election work, with podcasts, books, articles, the written word. The culture is being redefined, and be a part of it. And get out there and meet your plebs, because being the lonely Bitcoiner, sulking and doom scrolling on Nostr or Twitter doesn't move us forward. But being the Bitcoiner that I'm going to shill orange pill at, that downloads orange pill at, finds their closest Bitcoiner, meets them for a beer or a coffee, and then thinks of a way to orange pill that bar, restaurant, or cafe, that's a step forward. That is making a change, a huge difference.
Like I said, I used to organize the blockchain meetups, which a bunch of us are the Bitcoin maxis now. And all I did was just offer, I bought like 10 boxes of pizza and convinced a craft brewer to show up and sell his beer for Bitcoin, so that you could buy the beer there from the craft brewer using Bitcoin, and then there'd be some pizza. And we started with 4 people, and our biggest one was about 300 people. And at those meetups is where I met every single one of my partners that I've built this stuff with. And it takes time, right? But it's get out there, and of course 99% of the people that showed up were I've never heard of, or maybe were scammers and crazy. But if you're not alone, right? And you'll only realize that when you actually go out there. And the other thing is, at this point, there's probably a meetup near you, right? So just show up and start building those bonds, because the meat space is real, and that's where the battle really is, and that's where we're losing. By the way, like that's where we're losing. So yeah, definitely a fan of getting out there. And what we did is literally a byproduct of organizing meetups and getting together with your neighbors. We realized this is what matters to people, and we found a way to use the tools after careful study for years, that this was the right way. And so yeah, I hope it inspires people to participate.
Carlos, thanks for coming on. Thank you for bringing the fire, being bullish, being positive, being happy. How can people reach out to you if there's any way they can help or feel they can add value or have been inspired by what you've said?
Thanks. Well, we're on Nostr as Simple Proof. I'm also on Nostr as Digital Witness. Then visit simpleproof.com. You can use our contact form there. We reply. We were canceled off of Twitter, but as a company, because Bitcoins and elections are kind of kryptonite still on Twitter. But I'm personally on there as Carlos Toriello, and you can reach out there. My DMs are open, and effectively, it's if you know someone, or if you are your county clerk, or know someone that is a county clerk, or know someone that can get to your elections authority, this is a simple, no-brainer, cheap, like one-step implementation, and your county could be the first county in the United States to protect their elections with Bitcoin. So please reach out. We still have time. As long as the elections haven't happened, there's still time. So let's do this.
Or anyone listening from any country.
Right now, we're focused on the U.S. because it's a big nut to crack. But immediately afterwards, please do. And it takes time, so you'll just get started if this is keen to you. So please reach out.
Cool, excellent. Well, thank you for coming on, mate, and enjoy the rest of your day today.
Thank you, Daniel. Take care.